The acoustical ceiling panels in the wellness studio measured exactly 24 by 24 inches. I knew this because I had spent the last 45 minutes staring flatly at them, mapping the grid layout to avoid focusing on the erratic, highly irregular rhythm of my own heartbeat. I was lying flat on my back on a high-density polyurethane foam mat. The ambient temperature of the room was set to a precise 72 degrees Fahrenheit, yet a cold layer of sweat coated the back of my neck. I was, objectively and measurably, the worst student in the class. Inhale for a rigid count of 4. The instructor's voice resonated through the dim, temperature-controlled room. It was a precise, perfectly modulated frequency designed specifically to bypass auditory defenses and soothe the limbic system. Hold for 7. Exhale for 8. Push the oxygen out through the resistance of your teeth. I attempted to execute the command. My diaphragm, tightly coiled from years of 80-hour work weeks hunting offshore corporate fraud, refused to expand past a fractional inch. I was a 32-year-old senior forensic accountant. My cardiologist, Dr. Aris, had mandated my attendance in this specific respiratory regulation class after my resting heart rate hit 112 beats per minute during a standard treadmill stress test. The medical ultimatum had been clear: regulate the autonomic nervous system or prepare for a major ischemic event before my 35th birthday. I was a student here entirely against my will. I trusted ledgers. I trusted encrypted Excel arrays, disbursement logs, and verifiable tax liens. I did not trust sitting in a circle with 14 other civilians attempting to breathe away the concrete, high-stakes realities of the world. Mr. Reyes, the voice appeared directly above me, interrupting my silent structural analysis of the ceiling grid. I opened my eyes. Maeve Wilson, the studio owner and primary instructor, was looking down at me. She was 39, wearing simple, tailored, athletic wear in a muted charcoal tone. Her posture was flawless, an anatomical masterclass in spinal alignment. She possessed a terrifyingly observant gaze that made me feel entirely transparent, as if she were reading my physical data the exact same way I read a hidden balance sheet. Your intercostal muscles are completely locked, Maeve observed, her voice dropping to a low, localized register so the other meditating students couldn't hear. You are utilizing your upper chest exclusively to draw air. The mechanical limitation is severe. You are essentially hyperventilating in slow motion. My respiratory mechanics are functioning at baseline capacity, I replied, my voice a clipped, dry whisper that betrayed the residual tension in my vocal cords. I am absorbing sufficient oxygen. The biological requirement is met. You are surviving. You are not regulating, she corrected gently. She did not argue further. She simply stepped back as the digital class timer chimed a soft, synthetic bell. Class is dismissed. Please wipe down your mats with the provided antibacterial cloths. Mr. Reyes, remain on your mat for a moment. I sat up, the joints in my neck cracking loudly in the quiet space. The other students slowly gathered their belongings, speaking in hushed, relaxed tones, and filed out of the double glass doors, back into the chaotic, relentless noise of the busy NYC street. I remained seated. I kept my back perfectly straight, my hands resting strictly on my knees, refusing to slouch. Maeve walked over to the climate control panel on the far wall. She keyed in a code, reducing the ambient temperature from 72 degrees to a crisp, clinical 68. She walked back to the front of the room and sat on the edge of the instructor's elevated wooden dais, facing me directly. Dr. Aris forwarded me your preliminary medical file when you enrolled, Maeve said, opening a small, leather-bound notebook. She didn't look at the pages. She looked directly at me. You suffered a minor stress-induced ischemic event 3 weeks ago. Your cortisol levels are constantly redlined. Your body firmly believes it is in a state of permanent warfare. The event was a statistical anomaly caused by a prolonged audit schedule involving 3 multinational holding companies, I stated, defending my operational integrity with facts. The timeline was compressed. The pressure was an occupational requirement. The human heart is not a spreadsheet, Silas. She countered smoothly, tapping her pen lightly against the paper. It is a mechanical pump governed entirely by the autonomic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response, is jammed in the on position. My standard group curriculum is insufficient for your level of systemic gridlock. Then I will inform Dr. Aris that the medical mandate is unfulfillable, and I will resume my standard work schedule. I moved to stand, planting my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. Sit down, she instructed. It wasn't a request. It was an absolute, authoritative command that brokered zero argument. I stopped my upward momentum, the sheer force of her professional certainty overriding my instinct to flee. I sat back onto the foam mat. I am offering a specialized intervention, Maeve explained, her eyes locking onto mine, aggressively analyzing the rigid, defensive tension in my jaw. It is a highly technical, advanced respiratory protocol. It is rooted in Tantric breathwork. My brow furrowed immediately. I rapidly cross-referenced the term against my mental database, analyzing the social definitions. Tantra is heavily associated with illicit, esoteric, or highly inappropriate physical practices in Western media. I do not engage in unverified spiritualism. I am a forensic auditor. I require proven metrics and verifiable data. Maeve did not smile, but a spark of profound intelligence illuminated her expression. She appreciated the pushback. She preferred a skeptic who demanded logic over a blind follower who merely wanted to be soothed. The Sanskrit root of the word tantra translates to loom or weave. She stated, dismantling my misconception with factual, historical data. It is the mechanical process of weaving physical systems together to create a stronger fabric. The Western media corrupted the term to sell magazines. In a clinical, physiological setting, tantric breathing is simply the mechanical synchronization of breath retention and vagus nerve stimulation to manually force the brain into a parasympathetic rest state. She leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on her knees. Her gaze remained unwavering. No incense, no spiritualism, just biological mechanics, pure algorithms. But it requires intense, undivided focus. It requires absolute silence. I will teach it to you, but it has to be just you and me. Private sessions. Tuesdays and Thursdays, after the studio closes to the public. I evaluated the data. I was failing physically. My chest felt constantly tight, a heavy, suffocating pressure that degraded my analytical focus at work. She was offering a systemic fix stripped of emotional baggage. It was a logical transaction. Specify the hourly rate for private instruction, I demanded. Your standard tuition covers it, she replied, closing her notebook with a definitive snap. Be here tomorrow at 1,900 hours. The next evening, I arrived precisely at 1,855 hours. The main lobby of the wellness center was dark, the street-facing blinds securely drawn. I walked through the quiet corridor to the primary studio. Maeve was waiting inside. Remove your shoes. Place your phone on the reception desk, she ordered as soon as I crossed the threshold. I complied, sliding my mobile device across the counter, severing my connection to the corporate grid. I walked to the center of the room and sat on the mat. We begin with the physical mechanism, Maeve said, sitting opposite me, maintaining a strict, professional distance of 3 feet. Place your right hand flat against your stomach, just below the sternum. I placed my hand on my abdomen. The fabric of my dress shirt felt unusually restrictive. When you inhale, your stomach must expand outward, she instructed, demonstrating the motion perfectly. The chest does not move, only the diaphragm. We will utilize a geometric ratio. Inhale for 5 seconds, hold for 5, exhale for 10. The extended exhalation is the physical trigger mechanism for the vagus nerve. Understood, I said. Close your eyes, she commanded. I closed my eyes. The sudden absence of visual input was profoundly disorienting. Inhale, she counted, her voice a flawless metronome. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale. Push the air. Slower. Control the release valve. I struggled immediately. My chest wanted to heave. My brain, starved for the adrenaline it was addicted to, began throwing critical error codes, urging me to panic, to stand up, to check my corporate email for incoming alerts. My hand twitched violently against my stomach. Do not analyze the discomfort. Maeve's voice anchored me in the dark, cutting through the rising mental static. Focus entirely on the numbers. You are an accountant, Silas. Count the seconds. Let the math override the panic. I grabbed onto the logic. I visualized the numbers glowing in the dark space behind my eyelids. 5, 5, 10. It was an equation. It was a predictable, controllable input yielding a specific, measurable output. We ran the loop for 30 continuous minutes. When she finally told me to open my eyes, the ambient temperature of the room felt fundamentally different. The sharp, persistent ringing in my ears that had plagued me for a month was entirely gone. I checked my pulse against my wrist, timing it against the second hand of my tactical watch, 62 beats per minute. "Your jaw is unclenched," Maeve observed, a quiet satisfaction echoing in her tone. "The mechanism works. The protocol is highly efficient," I admitted, my voice a low, steady rumble, entirely devoid of its usual clipped anxiety. "Thank you, Instructor." Over the next 2 weeks, the Tuesday and Thursday evening sessions became the singular stabilizing anchor in my chaotic operational schedule. The crushing chest pressure vanished entirely. My sleep cycles extended from 3 hours to a solid 6. I stopped mapping the ceiling tiles and started trusting the process. Maeve remained strictly professional, but the shared silence in the darkened studio built a profound, unspoken foundation of mutual respect. I began to view her not just as an instructor, but as an indispensable asset to my physical survival. Then, on the third Tuesday, the system was aggressively attacked. I arrived at the studio at 1,850 hours. The front door was locked. I waited. I do not deviate from schedules. At 1,905, the heavy glass door finally swung open. Maeve stood there, holding a thick stack of legal documents. Her usual immaculate composure was severely fractured. The color was drained from her face, and her hands were trembling, rattling the crisp white paper. "The session is canceled, Silas," she said, her voice tight, attempting to project authority but failing to mask the distress. "I have to close the studio." I stepped into the lobby, ignoring her dismissal. "I do not accept sudden variable changes without a comprehensive data review." I closed the door behind me, sealing us inside. "Specify the nature of the closure." "It's a municipal zoning board mandate," she whispered, turning away and walking toward the reception desk. She dropped the papers onto the polished counter. "My landlord, Mr. Sterling. He sits on the city commercial zoning committee. He wants to sell this building to a luxury condo developer, but my commercial lease has 3 full years remaining." I walked to the desk, standing beside her, my eyes instantly scanning the headers of the documents. A standard commercial lease cannot be broken simply for a property sale without a massive financial buyout clause. That is contract law. "He isn't buying me out," Maeve said bitterly, pointing a shaking finger to the top document. "He filed an emergency injunction with the permit office this afternoon. He is claiming my business violates the building's strict, family-friendly morality clause. He is attempting to officially revoke my operational permit." I frowned, reading the heavy legal jargon. A respiratory wellness studio does not violate morality parameters. The claim lacks structural logic. "He submitted evidence." Maeve's voice cracked slightly. She pulled a photograph from beneath the legal notice and pushed it across the counter toward me. It was a grainy, zoomed-in photo taken through the street-facing window of the studio. It showed Maeve and me sitting in the darkened room last Thursday. We were simply sitting on mats, fully clothed, but the lighting was extremely low, and the angle was intentionally skewed to look secretive. "He attached a sworn affidavit," Maeve continued, crossing her arms defensively, shrinking into herself. "His assistant claims she stood outside the door and overheard me offering you tantric lessons and explicitly stating it would be just you and me in a dark room after hours. He completely weaponized the terminology. He is telling the zoning board I run an illicit, adult-oriented service disguised as a yoga studio." The sheer, calculated malice of the tactic registered immediately in my brain. It was a brilliantly executed bureaucratic assassination. Sterling was using societal ignorance regarding a specialized respiratory term to destroy her professional reputation and steal her lease without paying a single dime in buyout fees. "The preliminary hearing is on Friday," Maeve said, staring blankly at the wall behind the desk. "If the board votes to revoke my permit, I default on the lease. I lose the business. I lose everything I've built. I can't afford a high-tier corporate litigator to fight a zoning board that he practically controls." I picked up the legal notice. I did not offer her a hug. I did not offer her empty platitudes about everything working out in the end. Empathy without concrete action is a useless metric. "You do not require a litigator," I stated, my voice dropping into a cold, Absolute register that I reserved exclusively for hostile audits. You require a forensic accountant. She looked at me, confusion fighting through her panic. What? Sterling is a commercial landlord executing a rapid, hostile eviction to facilitate a real estate sale. I analyzed aloud, my mind rapidly compiling the data points. Landlords do not utilize highly aggressive, reputation-destroying tactics unless they are operating under extreme financial duress. A stable developer simply offers a buyout to clear the tenant. Sterling is panicked. He requires immediate liquidity. I pulled my secure, heavily encrypted laptop from my leather briefcase and set it firmly on her reception desk. "What are you doing?" she asked, taking a hesitant step closer. "I am establishing a counter-offensive perimeter," I said, booting the machine. "I have authorized clearance to access municipal property tax ledgers, commercial LLC registries, and state loan covenants through my firm's investigative portal. I am going to map Sterling's exact financial architecture." "Silas, you can't," Maeve protested, her hand hovering over my keyboard but not touching it. Her protective instincts flared. "You are my student. You are here to avoid stress. A hostile investigation violates your medical mandate. It will trigger your cortisol." I stopped typing. I turned my head to look at her. The physical proximity was close. I could smell the faint, clean trace of eucalyptus and mint that permeated her clothes. "You taught me how to regulate my autonomic nervous system," I told her, my eyes locking onto hers, holding the contact with unyielding certainty. "My heart rate is currently resting at exactly 64 beats per minute. I am entirely calm, and I am fiercely protective of the systems that keep me functional. This studio is a functional system. I will not allow a corrupt bureaucrat to dismantle it based on fraudulent data." Maeve stared at me, the rigid panic in her shoulders slowly melting under the weight of my absolute competence. She saw the factual baseline in my posture. I wasn't running on adrenaline. I was running on purpose. She nodded once. "What do you need from me?" "Coffee," I requested, turning back to the glowing screen. "Black. And the original? Physical copy of your lease agreement." For the next 4 hours, the pristine studio lobby transformed into a forensic war room. I bypassed the superficial data. I cross-referenced Sterling's primary LLC against 14 different holding companies registered in the state. I pulled the public procurement records for the municipal zoning board he chaired. I analyzed property tax assessments to find late payments. I utilized advanced data scraping algorithms to pull his commercial loan covenants and vendor disbursement logs. Maeve sat quietly in the chair beside the desk, providing me with lease documents, highlighters, and hot coffee. She didn't interrupt the silence. She understood the required mechanics of intense, unbroken focus. At 11:30 p.m., the algorithmic search finalized a massive data match. "Contact," I said softly, the cursor hovering over a glaring, undeniable discrepancy on a digital ledger. Maeve leaned over my shoulder. "What did you find?" "Sterling is the chairman of the district zoning board," I explained, tapping the screen to highlight a specific column of numbers. "The board controls a municipal slush fund designed for local commercial infrastructure improvements. According to these ACH transfer records and procurement disbursement logs, the board has been awarding massive landscaping and maintenance contracts to a vendor called Apex Solutions." "Who is Apex Solutions?" Maeve asked, tracing the line of data on the monitor. "A shell company," I stated, pulling up the state registry filing. "Registered to Sterling's sister-in-law." I traced the vendor payment trails. The municipal funds are deposited into Apex, filtered through 2 other LLCs, and then dispersed directly into the commercial mortgage account for this specific building. Maeve gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "He's stealing city money to pay the mortgage on my studio?" "Yes," I confirmed, pulling a portable encrypted drive from my bag and saving the raw data logs. "He has been systematically embezzling for 2 years. But last month, the state attorney general announced an independent municipal audit of all local zoning boards." Sterling panicked. "He needs to sell this building to the luxury condo developer immediately to generate a massive cash influx to replace the stolen municipal funds before the state auditors open the books. Your lease is the only thing preventing the immediate sale. He's framing me for a morality violation to cover up a felony embezzlement," she summarized, her voice hardening. The fear was replaced entirely by a cold, righteous anger. "Precisely," I said, hitting print. The small office printer whirred to life, spitting out the compiled ledger sheets, ACH routing numbers, and shell company registries. "He manufactured a crisis. Tomorrow at the hearing, We will dismantle it. I gathered the warm papers from the printer tray. As I stacked them, Maeve reached out. She placed her hand firmly over mine, stopping my movement. Her skin was warm against the cold paper. Silas, she said quietly, you didn't have to do this. You could have just found another studio, another instructor. No, I replied, looking down at her hand, then up to her face. I did not pull away. The physical contact was an unregulated variable, but it did not trigger an internal alarm. It triggered a profound sense of grounding. Other studios offer generic spiritualism. You offer concrete data. I value truth, and I value the person who taught me how to breathe. She smiled, a small, weary, but fiercely genuine expression. I'll see you tomorrow, Friday, 2 p.m. The municipal zoning board hearing was held in a stark, fluorescent-lit conference room at City Hall. The air smelled of stale floor wax and administrative indifference. Sterling sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by 2 independent board members. He looked supremely confident, tapping his silver pen against a manila folder containing his fabricated evidence. Maeve and I walked into the room. She wore a sharp, tailored navy suit. She looked like an executive, utterly professional and completely untouchable. I walked one step behind her right shoulder, wearing a dark charcoal suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Miss Wilson, Sterling sneered, looking at the clock on the wall. You are exactly on time for your permit revocation? And who is this? You aren't permitted formal legal counsel at a preliminary zoning review. Mr. Reyes is not my legal counsel, Maeve stated, taking a seat at the opposing table. Her voice was perfectly modulated, utilizing the exact respiratory control she taught. He is my compliance auditor. I remained standing. I placed my briefcase on the table and popped the brass latches. The sharp clicks echoed loudly in the quiet room. This board has reviewed the affidavit and the photographic evidence, Sterling announced loudly, addressing the room to establish dominance. Miss Wilson's establishment is operating far outside the bounds of its commercial permit. Offering illicit tantric services violates the fundamental morality codes of this district. The term tantra refers to the systemic weaving of physical breath control to regulate the vagus nerve, I interjected. My voice a deep, flat rumble that cut through his bureaucratic bluster like a scythe. It is a highly documented physiological intervention. The photograph you provided depicts a standard, medically mandated respiratory therapy session. It is completely benign. That is your creative interpretation, Sterling scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. The board protects the community. The board is currently protecting a felon, I stated, my tone stripping away any remaining pretense of civility. I pulled a thick stack of printed ledgers from my briefcase. I did not hand them to Sterling. I slid them across the smooth table directly to the 2 independent board members sitting next to him. Sterling's face froze. What is this? Unassailable logic, I replied, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with him. Document 1 is a certified log of ACH transfer records and vendor payment trails. It details a systematic embezzlement of municipal infrastructure funds directly into a shell LLC controlled by your sister-in-law, Mr. Sterling. The 2 independent board members gasped, frantically reading the highlighted lines of the financial logs. Document 2, I continued, placing another sheet on the table, is your current commercial mortgage covenant on Miss Wilson's building. It details a catastrophic default condition. You require the immediate sale of the property to cover the stolen municipal funds before the impending state audit begins next week. Sterling stood up, his chair scraping violently against the linoleum floor. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. This is a fabrication. You illegally access private financial records. You have no authority here. I utilize publicly available tax assessments, standard procurement disbursement logs, and verifiable corporate registries to compile an irrefutable chain of custody, I countered smoothly, my posture relaxed but completely dominant. You manufactured a fraudulent morality complaint to illegally evict a commercial tenant and facilitate a desperate real estate liquidation. It is a textbook case of corporate fraud and extortion. Sterling slammed his hands on the table. You can't prove anything. I'll have you thrown out of this building. You lack the leverage to do so, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. I pulled one final piece of paper from the briefcase. Because a certified, digitally hashed copy of this exact dossier was transmitted via secure courier to the State Attorney General's office at 1,300 hours today, utilizing my firm's protected whistleblower channel. The room went completely, devastatingly silent. The heavy, oppressive silence of a trap, snapping entirely shut. Sterling looked at me, his eyes wide with sheer horror. He knew the terminology. He knew what a whistleblower channel meant. The state was already involved. He couldn't cover it up. He couldn't silence the room. One of the independent board members cleared his throat, physically pushing his chair away from Sterling to create distance. The motion to review Miss Wilson's permit is immediately dismissed. Mr. Sterling, you are instructed to remain in this room. We are notifying the Office of the Inspector General immediately. Sterling didn't argue. He looked at the ledgers on the table. He realized the math was completely unassailable. He slumped back into his chair, the bluster entirely gone, trapped by his own hubris. I snapped my briefcase shut. I looked down at Maeve. She was staring at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of profound shock and immense, life-altering relief. The perimeter is secure, I told her quietly. We are leaving. We walked out of City Hall and into the bright, crisp afternoon air. The chaotic noise of the city surrounded us, horns honking, sirens blaring, people shouting, but my internal system remained perfectly regulated. The threat was neutralized. The logic held. Maeve stopped on the sidewalk, a few yards away from the building entrance. She turned to face me. The professional, untouchable armor she had worn in the hearing dissolved completely, leaving only raw, unfiltered gratitude. You destroyed him, she said, her voice full of quiet awe. You walked into a government building and completely dismantled his entire life in under 4 minutes with just paper and ink. I proved the truth with verifiable facts, I corrected, keeping my hands resting near the handle of my briefcase. He operated on a flawed system. He assumed a respiratory instructor lacked defensive capital. He didn't know I had a forensic ghost in my corner, she smiled, stepping closer. The physical distance between us vanished. She reached out. She didn't shake my hand. She placed her palm flat against the center of my chest, right over my sternum. It was the exact diagnostic touch she used in the studio to monitor diaphragmatic expansion. I froze. The sensory input spiked drastically, but I didn't pull away. I allowed the variable to process. Inhale, she instructed softly, her eyes tracking the movement of my chest under my suit jacket. I inhaled. A deep, slow, perfectly measured breath that expanded my diaphragm and pushed against her warm hand. Exhale, she whispered. I exhaled slowly, controlling the release valve. I waited for the familiar rush of cortisol, the spike of adrenaline that usually accompanied an unregulated social interaction. It didn't come. Instead, my heart was beating steadily, but with an entirely different kind of intensity. For the first time in my adult life, my heart was racing not from the crushing pressure of adrenaline or the fear of a systemic failure, but simply because of the profound, grounding presence of the person standing in front of me. Your mechanics are flawless, she murmured, looking up into my eyes. The boundary between instructor and student was entirely eradicated, replaced by a deep, mutual recognition of equals. I had a highly competent instructor, I replied, my voice dropping to a rough whisper. I lifted my hand, my fingers wrapping gently over hers where it rested against my chest. I didn't let go. The studio requires a secondary lock mechanism to prevent future unauthorized entry from corrupt landlords. I think I know someone precise enough to install it, she smiled, her thumb lightly tracing the lapel of my suit jacket. I will be there at 1,900 hours, I promised. The end.